This is my presentation for Art 652. This will be about an experiment with fire or the pit fire method and my search for blue within pit firing. So what is pit firing? It's the oldest known method for firing ceramics. It involves traditionally digging a pit in the earth and then adding your pottery and combustibles and lighting it on fire. Since the first known examples of 29,000 BCE, it has gone through different iterations. People have different methods for it. There's mixed methods. I've adopted a mixed method, but basically it's just that. You put pots in a pit, you add sawdust or wood, metal oxides, and salt, and you create these very natural organic patterns on pottery. And then you clean it, wax it, and buff it. It's a very low fire. It's considered earthenware. You rarely get over 2,000 degrees. And it's used in niche circles or for certain effects, but also still traditionally in different cultural places, such as Africa. So baby steps. My first experiment with pit fire was last semester. I happened to put a sculpture or two in, and I absolutely love the results. I make these organic coral-like sculptures, and I've always wanted to find a way to address the surface. So these are some of my first results. I had colored these little sculptures. The one on the left was pink, the one in the middle was blue, and the one on the right was black. And I put them in the pit fire, and I got these wonderful colors on it. You can see where the red came from the copper carbonate, the black came from the ash and the soot. I added some white little details to just bring out what was naturally made. And I found that these patterns match my sculptures so beautifully, and I wanted to learn more about it. But what I really wanted to find was blue. A lot of the pit fire examples I have seen and looked at, you get a lot of reds and a lot of yellows and blacks and grays, but blue is very rare to see, and I wanted to see if I could push that within the pit fire. So I started off experimenting with saggers, these tiny little pockets of foil, sawdust, salt, a little tiny ceramic piece, and then combustibles. This one has still wool to see what it would do. I also tested with kelp, with cobalt carbonate, with some nori or seaweed paper, more sawdust types, and just really seeing what I could get from it. So I made this little kiln just to test these saggers. I put sawdust at the bottom first, put the saggers in, added the newspaper, then added my kindling and the wood, lit it all on fire, and you can see the sawdust, the ash in the bottom right-hand corner ready for me to take them out. I got some results from this method. After trying it a couple times, I was able to get some reds, but I was getting a lot of grays and I wasn't getting any blues, and I felt I really needed to narrow it with what combustibles I was using. One of them did have a tiny speck of blue, so I knew I was doing something. I had blue somewhere, so it was just, where was it? And what could I push further to get it? So instead of just staying in the pit, I wanted to control the temperature more. So I moved my firing into a soda kiln or a gas kiln so I could really control that temperature, get it to burn faster, and save myself some headache with the traditional pit firing method, just wanting to go hotter and get some of my metal oxides to just produce more colors. So same thing, sawdust down, added a lot of salt. This time I tried bamboo just to put it up above the sawdust to reduce some of the black and the gray I was getting. In the right hand, you can see the copper or the cobalt carbonate that I added to try to get that blue. Then I layered in the work. I first tried sprinkling in the cobalt carbonate. I added some copper sulfate. It's actually a blue chemical. I added still wool, and then I sprinkled in my seaweed and my kelp. And here are some results from that. So I'm getting much more subtle coloring when it comes to the copper sulfate. You can see these wonderful moments from the still wool where it's got those nice iron striping. But I am getting some blue. I'm getting different shades of blue, but not as strong as I want. And it was from just sprinkling it in there. It would just stay. It doesn't swirl around with the salt like the copper carbonate would. So I needed to do something else with the cobalt. So I'm getting close, but can I get closer? So I tried it again and I had similar results. This time I watered down the copper sulfate and a little bit of the cobalt, but there wasn't enough cobalt to the water. And so I still had this sprinkling effect. So I'm almost there, and I had one more shot at the end of the semester. So this time I added more cobalt carbonate to the water, and I sponged it up, and I really sponged it on heavily, and I sprinkled what I had left over on top of it, still adding in the copper carbonate, still adding in copper sulfate, a lot more salt, a lot more kelp. The kelp has a great salt content, so it can really help my materials move around in the firing. And then I added a lot more combustibles on top, a lot of newspaper and everything. Unfortunately, during this firing, I couldn't get the gas kiln to stay lit. There was a malfunction and ended up having to just traditionally just light everything on fire. I lost a lot of my combustibles and I had a lot of cracking issues, but I knew I was getting close. Where it is black, really deep black, especially in that middle piece at the bottom, is where I had a lot of cobalt. And I knew that it was going to go blue. On the left hand at the bottom, you can see a tiny little speck of blue. And I loved the effect I was getting with the additional salt on top and getting some deep blacks from adding in firing into it. And here are the sculptures for it. The bottom left-hand corner, you can see that little bit of flashing of blue where that cobalt carbonate was getting just hot enough of the ash buildup to start turning blue. I'm still getting those beautiful copper sulfates, but where those black drips are, it should have been blue. So I know I'm close, but unfortunately the search still continues. But it's not a failure. I see this all as great success. I've been able to narrow down to just using kelp, adding in that still wool for those wonderful iron spots, still adding in the copper sulfate for red and to mix my chemicals around, a lot more salt, adding sawdust on top with salt on top just to create more of those traditional fire effects, but then also that cobalt carbonate, sponging it on and just adding it like a paint. So I'm very happy with the results I've had, very excited to keep going, and that's a brief overview of an experiment into Pitfire.